Service in Raleigh. This is Jonathan Blaze with the latest Ian briefing. This is focused on Central North Carolina. This briefing is being conducted at 11:30 on Friday, September 30th. So we'll get right to the latest here on Ian. Ian remains a Category 1 hurricane. It is just off the South Carolina coast. The center of the storm continues to move off to the north at about 14 miles an hour. It is expected, the center of the storm is expected to move onshore across the northern South Carolina coast later this afternoon. Across our part of the world in central North Carolina, we expect weather conditions to continue to deteriorate this morning into this afternoon, with the heaviest rain, strongest winds expected during the mid-afternoon into the mid to late evening hours. More details on that in a moment. And again, our impacts here in this part of the world will be focused on heavy rain, which could result in some flash flooding. We'd expect gusty winds that will result in some power outages and perhaps some minor wind damage. Also, there is a limited but non-zero threat of a tornado, mainly along and east of Interstate 95. We do expect the weather conditions, in terms of hazardous weather conditions, will quickly improve late tonight from south to north and into Saturday morning. And to be honest, the weekend will experience very few weather hazards other than lingering runoff from heavy rain and possible flooding on creeks and streams. Before we go to the next slide, I'll just give you a quick update on where Ian is centered as of this moment. This is a radar animation across from the National Weather Service Doppler radars across the southeast. North Carolina is shown here near the top center part of the state, with Raleigh right in this area here in the middle. The center of the hurricane is just off the South Carolina coast, and you can envision the circulation center gradually moving north to just a little bit west or down the coast from Myrtle Beach. We continue to have this broad area of light to moderate rain stretch across central North Carolina, with the surge of rain coming in early this morning. And if you notice, a couple things might catch your eye. First of all, temperatures right now are quite chilly. We have temperatures ranging from the upper 40s in parts of the Triad to the mid 50s in the Triangle and the lower 60s in the coastal plain near Fayetteville and Goldsboro. And that should jump out as you as not typical tropical weather or weather you would associate necessarily with a hurricane. And that's important to remember because this system is a bit of a hybrid storm. It is not purely tropical, at least how it's impacting us. And because of that, the weather is kind of being modulated over us right now a little bit. And that's why we've had kind of a steady light to moderate rain and not necessarily tropical downpours as of yet. But if you look just to the south and east near the coast, you can see temperatures our dew points are climbing into the mid and upper 60s in this area. And we have the air mass becoming a little bit more unstable, and you can start to see a few more yellows and patches of perhaps even orange on this radar display, showing heavier rainfall, more convective type precipitation, resulting in heavier rain and winds. And during the course of the afternoon to the evening, our air mass will change a little bit, and that will support heavier rain and increase weather hazards in our part of the world. And so far today, we've had wind gusts reach the lower 40s. We've had a wind gust of 41 miles per hour near Fayetteville and Maxton in the past hour or two, with lots of reports of wind gusts in the 30, 35 mile per hour range across the south, a little bit lighter up near the north, up toward the Virginia border. And in terms of rainfall, we've already had so far today, out in the Triad, we've had a couple tenths of an inch of rain, about a half inch or so, maybe up to 2/3 of an inch in the Triangle, and then the amounts quickly increase as you head toward Fayetteville and Goldsboro, where they've had upwards of 3/4 of an inch to over an inch already, with heavier rain moving onshore. So that kind of sets the stage for where we are now and what has fallen already. And looking at our slides here with the highlighting what hazards we have in effect. These have not changed at all. A tropical storm warning remains in effect for most of our area. We do not have one out for the northern counties near the Virginia border, just because the sustained winds up in that area will be just a little bit lighter and won't reach a criteria, although there are going to be some stronger wind gusts in that part of the state. And also we have a flood watch in effect for our entire area. That is in effect through the rest of the day into tomorrow morning. Highlighting the hazards and impacts in our part of the world here in central North Carolina, wind gusts of between 40 to 60 miles per hour are expected. I'll show a map here of the spatial display of those here in just a moment. The strongest winds will be across the south, near the South Carolina border, and the southeast, and lesser winds up toward the Virginia border. Those winds should be strong enough to result in some down trees and power lines. We've already heard from the DOT this morning that there were some down trees scattered across the area already as of now. We expect those reports to increase during the day. The strongest winds are expected area-wide, generally from mid-afternoon to mid-evening, with the timing of that kind of moving from south to north. Flooding rain is a concern as well. We are pretty confident we'll see 3 to 5 inches of rain across the area. That should result in some localized flash flooding of streams and creeks, low-lying areas, typical flood-prone areas. Fortunately, those amounts should keep us out of widespread kind of flash flood conditions. The greatest threat of flooding, again, will be across our south. And the greatest threat of the timing of that would be later today as the heavier rainfall amounts come in and even lingering into the overnight. There is a small risk, level 2 out of 5, for isolated tornadoes across our coastal plain. That's mainly east of Interstate 95. That threat is likely to really start ramping up as we head into the late afternoon and early evening. It'll take a little while for the air mass out there to warm up and to stabilize. And finally, river flooding, there is a minor concern for that. Typically in the minor flooding category across some of the larger rivers, those most at risk would be the flashier ones that typically respond a little quicker, thinking of places like the Hall River and the Rocky River, and especially places across the south. So going on to just a general highlight of the threat levels, we're most concerned about rainfall and flash flooding, secondarily wind and power outages, and isolated trees getting blown down. Tornadoes, those should be fairly focused and small in terms of duration and impact areas, but any tornado can be destructive and life-threatening, so that is a concern. And fortunately, river flooding in terms of widespread significant impact is expected to be limited. The timeline for events, we expect the worst of the weather this afternoon and this evening, and probably to refine that a little bit more, the worst of the weather would be maybe mid-afternoon, starting first in the south and southeast, and then into the mid to late evening. And then conditions beginning to improve tonight from south to north, with the winds, or first rain beginning to relax and the winds relaxing as well. Although heavy rain and runoff tonight could result in still some dangerous and hazardous traveling conditions. It's always difficult to spot flooding dangers at night, so please be especially cautious traveling tonight with all the rain that will still be working itself through the system. Weather conditions will improve in terms of hazards for Saturday night and Sunday. The weather won't be great. There'll be a lot of clouds. It'll still be cool. Will be a few breaks of sunshine and a bit of a breeze, but heavy rain will be over. Widespread rain, widespread wind threat, that'll all be over really tonight. So the weather this weekend isn't great, but it is looking a little bit better than perhaps it did a few days ago. But please be concerned that or aware that there will be a runoff from the heavy rain, so creeks and streams will be running fast and high. Keep children away from those kind of threats, and be on the lookout for flooded roadways in the area. Here's a quick synopsis of what the weather radar may look like. There are lots of these kind of simulations floating around out there, and they all have different flavors. But what's important to note, and it may be a little difficult to see, but central North Carolina is in this area on each of these panels. You can see Raleigh written here. The coast is down in this area. So this morning into midday, we have this light to moderate rain over much of our area, with a few of these stronger cells beginning to develop near the coast. As the center of Ian moves inland, we get kind of this northeast quadrant of a feeder band or two perhaps moving into our area 3 o'clock, and then especially about 6 into 9. So really that 3 to 9 o'clock time range today will be especially problematic. The afternoon commute will probably be quite difficult, especially in Raleigh and Fayetteville. But if you notice, once we get to midnight, the heavy rain shuts off in our southeast from Raleigh south and east, and we just have some lingering showers. That band of heavier rain is now beginning to approach the Virginia state line and also into the Triad. And by 6 in the morning here in the lower right image, Just scattered showers, low overcast, and breezy conditions are expected. So by the time we get up tomorrow, the worst of the weather certainly will have passed. We'll just be dealing with the lingering impacts from it. So the peak of the weather essentially is going to be mid-afternoon to mid-evening, a little bit earlier in that time frame in the south, a little bit later to the north and west. Looking at the maximum sustained winds today, we have strongest winds to the south across the Sandhills in terms of sustained winds near the circulation center. That'll be experienced early this evening. But looking at the maximum wind gust on the right side here, pretty much anyone in the orange shaded should see gusts over 40 miles per hour, and down here in the Sandhills, southern Piedmont, that includes Fayetteville and Wadesboro and Albemarle, those kind of places, we'll have gusts well into the 40s and perhaps 50 mile per hour range, 55 mile per hour range in these areas. Much lighter wind gusts we are expecting up near the Virginia border in that area that is technically not in the tropical storm warning. All these winds should result in some down trees and power lines, so there is the expectation of some power outages. A quick check of the power outage map in North Carolina shows that there are about 6,000 or so customers without power in the state. Most of those are really, that's actually scattered across the state, so there hasn't been an area impacted in a focused manner yet. Expected storm total rainfall amounts. In general, these amounts range from about 3.5 to 4.5 inches. If you look, perhaps a signal of some higher amounts in a corridor from Cumberland County, Fayetteville, up into the Sandhills and Southern Pines area, and down toward Maxton, Laurinburg, this area. So this kind of axis here, and this is an area that's going to get the heavy rain ahead of the storm, or the rain we're experiencing now ahead of the storm, and then that core of banding that will be located near the circulation center. So these folks down here might actually get the maximum amount, slightly lesser amounts up near Virginia border. Regardless, all of these amounts of 3, 4, 5 inches will result in rises on streams and creeks, flooding of flood-prone areas, poor drainage areas, urban areas this afternoon and especially this evening. So a tricky afternoon, evening period is expected. Tornado potential is generally expected to be along and east of Interstate 95. This threat time is likely late afternoon and evening. It's going to take a while for the air mass here to destabilize, and you'll know that things are starting to become ripe if a tornado watch is issued. My expectation is that's still several hours away, so we're a little bit away from this threat developing. It should be fairly focused in the east and fairly limited in terms of duration as the system moves north and west. River flood potential, just highlighting that here are 3 locations where we are a little bit concerned about some minor flooding. This is the Rocky River near Norwood out in the southwestern part of our forecast area. It's forecast to rise pretty quickly and move into minor flooding during the overnight hours into Saturday morning. Also on the Hall River near Bynum, a rise is expected to develop a little bit later this afternoon, peaking just below flood stage. And similarly at the Deep River near Moncure, this will approach action stage or just below minor flood stage as we head on Saturday. Be careful with these exact numbers here, as they will fluctuate a little bit as the rainfall begins to get observed and kind of work its way through the system. But just in general terms, these locations are all in kind of the Sandhills, southern Piedmont area, mainly the south and west, where they tend to be a little bit faster responding rivers and creeks and where higher amounts are expected. And just some key takeaways for our area here. Confidence is high regarding the impacts. The storm is obviously spreading over the area now, so things are well and focused. We do not expect many surprises at this point. A total of 3 to 5 inches of rain is expected. There will be localized higher amounts, of course, and poor drainage areas, urban areas are likely to experience some flash flooding. Wind gusts will range from 40 to 60 miles per hour, most generally in the 40 to 50 mile per hour range. The 50 plus gusts will be a little bit limited, but they'll be likely focused across the Sandhills and the southern Piedmont, Fayetteville, Clinton, Maxton, those kind of areas. There is a small risk for some isolated tornadoes. That's, again, is generally confined to locations east of Interstate 95. And the river flooding is a concern, although unfortunately it looks like that will be fairly localized and just generally minor in nature in terms of the flood category. So that's it for the briefing here. I will pause the recording and stand by for any kind of questions.